Good morning. Blah, 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 right? And so my wife said, yeah, say yes, and we'll make a family day of it. The kids can play and we'll see some friends. And then my wife had knee surgery. And she said, look, I'll tell you what, I'm not riding in a car for 6 hours, so we'll see you later. So I got to come by myself, and I thought, okay, that's fine. But you know what? It's been a huge blessing because I had 5 or 6 hours in the car where I got to decide what I listened to. And you, if you have kids, you know how rare that is, right? I like rock and roll. My wife likes country music, and so all 3 of my kids have gravitated towards country music. And so we listen to country music all the time, and we try to play a game. We put something over the radio and see if we can name who's singing it the quickest. So that's all my kids want to do. But they get dominated by me and my wife, and so they ask us to wait a while. So we end up playing a game where they guess, and they win, and rub it in our faces, even though we didn't get a chance to guess. But I love it. It's so much fun, but to have a break was pretty nice, too, to be honest with you. Thank you for the invitation to be here today. I'm really excited about this. These are some of my favorite subjects to talk on, so it won't be hard for me to be excited about these things. We're going to have 3 sessions. We're going to talk about connection with each other. We're going to talk about involvement as members of this church, and then we're going to talk about evangelism, taking some of these good things to the people in our communities. And if you don't mind, I will probably drink a little bit of coffee from time to time as we talk. I have 3 girls at home, and this will be more than I talk all month. And so I'm not sure if my voice can keep up with it, just to be honest with you, but we'll see. I put my contact information up here. You may be like, who is he? I don't care. I don't want to know him, and that's fine too. And you may think, well, maybe I want to know him now, and at the end you'll say, well, never mind, I changed my mind. But I wanted to share this just in case you want any of my notes. You may not believe this, but from time to time I mess up and say something that's just not true. So if you would be so kind as to let me know if I were to do that, or if there are any things that we talk about today that you would like more information on, or you want to try to get started here, I want you to be able to reach out to me and connect to me if you want to do that. So I want to start with a bit of a story. I want to tell you about a guy that grew up in my hometown. His name is Rod Selman. And he had no really affiliation with the church whatsoever. His family was very, I would say, anti-religious. And Rod was somebody who, for some reason, always cared about those spiritual things. And he wanted to know the truth. And I'm going to move this down a little bit. Does that sound better? Or no difference? Feels better to me. All right. So Rod didn't really care about spiritual things at first, just like his family. But then as time went on, he got really interested in the Bible and he started studying it. And he said he remembers when he was in his bedroom and he read Acts chapter 2 for the first time, and he said, oh man, I need to be baptized. And he called the community church youth minister where he was and told him of his desire to be baptized. And the guy explained it away and said, no, that's not what that means. And so Rod thought, well, this guy's smarter than me, so that must be true. And went on with his life. Then when he was in high school, he had a teacher who was a member of the church and invited him to church, but Rod was like, no, I have no interest in that. I'm good where I'm at. And he ignored her, never thought a second thing about it. So he goes through his life, and he's religious in one sense, but I mean, he's a guy in the world, and you know what guys in the world do, especially when they're 17, 18, 19, 20. So Rod was a guy who just lived it up. And in college, the college that he went to, they had a table called Nighthawks for Christ at this little religious fair where he was attending. And so Rod goes to this thing, and he connects with the college minister, Colt Mahana. Some of you know him. He is where Jody Apple is, if any of you know that guy. And they connected. And Rod, over the course of several months, started tearing down his barriers, unlearning the things that he had falsely learned, and opening his heart to the gospel. And he fell in love with the group. And he'd always loved Jesus, but not the full Jesus, and not with his full life. And when he learned the gospel, this guy actually ran away from it. He's a guy from the middle of nowhere, Armurchie, Georgia, good old country boy, southern slang. But for some reason, he was an Arabic major in college. And so he went to the Middle East for 18 months when he first learned the gospel. 18 months, because he was so scared of what he had learned and he wanted to run from it. So when he got to the Middle East, he just partied, lived it up, and kind of ran away from the truth that he had discovered. But when he was there, he kept seeing proofs, things that reiterated what he had learned in the Bible, and he softened his heart to the gospel. And when he came back to North Georgia, to this college 18 months later, he was ready to obey the gospel. And so he was baptized. Greatest day of his life. He was actually baptized on the same day as his roommate. So these 2 guys that had grown up worldly with all the baggage that comes with, now Christians, little babies in the faith. And it was great for 2 days. And then COVID hit and shut down his school. And I got a call one day that said, hey, we've got a new convert coming to your town. You've never met him, and he's just become a Christian. but I need you to disciple him and mentor him because he is, wet behind the ears. He doesn't know what he's doing in a lot of ways. And I said, yeah, disciple someone. I know how to do that, but just in case I didn't, can you tell me what you've been doing? And so Cole opened up to me and he said, well, we have a men's group. It meets once a week. We meet at my house, and we talk about Scripture. It's not just a Bible study where I get up there and lecture, but I facilitate the discussion, and these guys ask the real questions, maybe questions they would be afraid to ask in a place like this with so many people that they don't know. And we talk about the real nitty-gritty. Some of these guys didn't have dads, and they've got questions they've never been able to ask a guy before. And so I said, okay, well, we need to do something like that. So Rod comes home, and I say, hey, Rod, do you want to join our men's group? He says, man, this is great. Every Church of Christ has these evangelistic, honest, gritty men's groups. And I say, okay, great, good. Now our group is 2 people, me and Rod. And that's not a very good group. So I'm like, okay, who else am I going to get in this group? And so I look around our congregation, and I try to find guys who are somewhere in that 18 to 40 range who, for whatever reason, have plateaued. They're not leading. They're not studying the Bible with anybody. They don't even always come to everything. And I invite them to be a part of the group. And about 7 of those guys said yes to that invitation. And so we started a group in my home on Tuesday nights from 6:30 to 8:30 for 3.5 years. And some of what I'm going to share today is some of the things that we talked through and some of the things as I learned as I went through this group. And here's what I thought. Just being honest with you, I thought, man, this will be really good for Rod. He's a new Christian. This will be really good for these 2 guys that aren't Christians yet. And this will be really good for the 6 or so lukewarm Christians that we've got. But I'm fine. Well, what I learned through this process is I wasn't fine, and there were some things that were missing from my life as well. And so not only did it help these guys, but it really helped me and changed my life too. So we started our group, created it for Rod and for the others, but I learned that I needed it. Let me tell you a story about 2 guys that you know. I don't need any help in my life. Everything that I've got is because of me. Everything that I've got is because of the work that I've done. And nobody has helped me. I mean, outside of God, obviously. God has helped me, but the truth is I really don't need anyone. Everything that I do on my own. I don't have any close friends, but that doesn't bother me because who needs them? I don't really need it. I'm strong enough to get by in life without them. And I don't have any sin. Not really. I mean, not anything that a quick, dear God, please forgive me right before I go to bed won't take care of. And not only that, I don't get emotional. I almost did once at my dad's funeral, but I held it together and held it in because that would have been weak. That's what I do with emotions. I just bottle them up. Not only that, I don't confront people. I mean, if somebody has sin in their life, what business of mine is that? I let them worry about them, and I worry about me. And I've also learned it doesn't really matter who I surround myself with. I can do what's right no matter who's around me. So it doesn't matter that I hang out mainly with coworkers who aren't Christians. I haven't seen that that's really affected me. I'm still a Christian. I can do this by myself. Or, what is wrong with me? I'm the only person that I know that seems to struggle. When I go to church, I see people and everyone is so happy. And we sing, oh, how I love Jesus, and we sing songs about being happy, and anywhere with Jesus I can safely go, but I can't sing that because I don't feel that way. I'm not happy. I'm not great. I'm not doing well. If the people at church knew me like the real me, they wouldn't like me. And so what that means is I have to put up a front. I can't be who I really am, and I can't talk about the things that I really struggle with because they would not get it and they would not understand. And so what that has done is that's created 2 of me. One that people see at church, one that they see on Facebook, and then the real me, who knows how I really feel when I'm alone and by myself. And I end up needing to live this double life just because there's 2 me's, basically. Now, I don't know if either of those things, I can do this on my own, I don't need anybody, or what's wrong with me, I'm the only one that feels that way, are hard for you to listen to, but they're hard for me to say. But the reality is we have a lot of people that feel this way. Either I can do it all on my own and I don't need anybody, or, man, everyone here is perfect. They've all got it together and I'm the only one that has a messed up life. But the reality is none of those things are true. There's not a single person that can do it on their own. Now, some of us may think that we can, but what I'll tell you is this: you're not a whole, complete, healthy person unless you have help from other people. I want to give you an example of that. Think about Joseph. Think about Joseph in the book of Genesis. Joseph may be the character I can think of that did the most on his own. But as you look at the end of Genesis, you can just ring those chapters, and the tears of Joseph fall out. Every other page, Joseph is crying about something. Why? Not that crying's bad, but Joseph is not a whole, healthy, emotional person, and he did it on his own, but it cost him something. And the second thing is this: some of us have tricked ourselves into thinking everybody else here has it right. And that could be because we're in close proximity, but we don't actually connect with each other. And we don't realize we're not the only one that doesn't have a perfect marriage. We're not the only one that has kids that sass us sometimes. We're not the only ones that wish if they could just flip a switch, things would be different. A lot of us feel that way, but we might not know it if we don't talk about it. And so this is what our men's group had to overcome. How are you? Good. How are you? Good. And that's the end of the conversation, because that's what we've been conditioned to do. You know, in America, we have so much opportunity. I mean, you literally can be a self-made man or woman. You can create opportunity out of nothing. Like, if you didn't have anything right now, you could go door to door detailing cars or washing cars or mowing grass, and you could probably eventually make enough to take care of yourself and your family. And so the American mindset of you can do anything you want, and you should be strong enough to, may be good for the country in some ways, but it's not a spiritual, it's not a Christian approach. No, you can't do everything on your own. No, you shouldn't be strong enough to. That's not the way that you were designed. And you know, a steady dose of work ethic and do your best is healthy, but do everything on your own is against what the Bible teaches. And too many of us as Americans have that mindset: I'll do it without any help. I can do this on my own. So I want to share just a few statistics with you to think about, to see how this bears itself out in our lives. Around half of the marriages in this country end in divorce. Do you know 69% of the kids in this country are raised in two-parent homes? But that means that 31% of kids are not. I work with our college group. I started doing that in March at Oak Hill, where I'm at in Rome. And we have a couple of guys who they don't know who their dad is. And do you know how that plays itself out in their life? With a lot of insecurities, with a lot of questions. And they need someone, a male figure, a Christian male figure, to step into their life and to spend time with them. And so I've tried to do that and to encourage other people to do that. But 30% of our kids in this country have that exact same problem, that they don't have a parent in their life, one or the other. 1 in 5 of our adults right now experiences a mental health problem each year. A lot of those go unaddressed. Let me ask you this question. Experts say that men are less likely than women to ask for help. Why do you think that is? Don't just say men are dumber. Yeah, I know. What else? Be nice. Pride. Okay, 2 people said pride. Jinx, by the way. 2 people said pride. So that's exactly right. Pride. Okay, it shows weakness. We have been conditioned to think that asking for help is a weakness. And it reminds me of the emperor's new clothes. Do you know that story? The emperor is actually naked, but he says he's wearing new clothes. And so the people are told, just say, "Oh, wow, you look great," until one little kid says, "He's not wearing any clothes," right? So it's that same syndrome. Is it weaker to need help and ask for it, or to need it and not ask for it? Well, to need it and not ask for it is weaker, because it's that pride that we're talking about. All right, what else? Anything else you can think of that might be a reason to not ask for help? Too macho, okay. Yeah, very good. I'm too strong for this. Maybe in theory, guys should ask for help, but not me, because I'm strong and I'm different. All right, so our society, unfortunately, has conditioned us to think the idea of needing help is weak. I think another thing is, too, how many of us have been burned by somebody that all they do is take? So what we do a lot of times is swing the pendulum, and we never ask for help, even if we're dying. I will crawl to the hospital, you know? Well, why? It's an overreaction. We do this in the church. We do this in our homes. We overreact to one thing, and we go to the opposite ditch, okay? But as Christians, our goal is to not be so influenced by culture, but to let the Bible influence us. So that's what I want us to talk about today, is some ways that we can connect and what the Bible has to say about that. All right, now Christians have an advantage in all of these things because we have God's help, we have the Bible, but we're not immune to these struggles. Now, if only there were a man or a woman in the Bible that could show us how to walk through problems while getting the help of other people. Well, there is. So if you have a Bible or if you have it on your phone, turn to the book of Nehemiah. That's where we'll spend most of our time in the text today. We're going to look at the story of Nehemiah. We'll just start in chapter 1. Now, unless you are just up on your prophets, minor prophets, and the guys mentioned at the end of the Old Testament, you might say, well, what's going on in the time period of Nehemiah? So let me give you a little background of where we're at so that you can appreciate what Nehemiah is working with here and what's going on in this time. Once you get to Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, that's the end of the Old Testament. Now, I know that there are books after that, but those books go back into things that were earlier. Let me give you an example that you know is true. Think about Psalms. Who wrote the majority of those? David. All right. David is not around after Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. He has already lived and died. So the book of Psalms actually goes back into that time period of Samuel and the kings and things like that. Same thing with Solomon. Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. That doesn't happen chronologically after Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. It happens before. So once you get to Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, we're about to have that 400-year period where there's the gap between the Old and the New Testament, and there's that what we call silent period, and we're getting ready for Jesus to come. So Nehemiah is about at the end of the thing. Even though if you look at your Old Testament, it doesn't look like that's the case. It is. All right, let's see what led up to the story of Nehemiah. All right, so creation in Genesis 1, God creates Adam and Eve and Adam sin in Genesis chapter 3 and verse 6, which is a huge problem. That changes the world forever. Everything that's happened since then as a result of sin entering into the world. But our God is not the kind of God to leave us just fumbling around in the dark. And so, as you would imagine, he offers a solution pretty quickly. Genesis 3:15, he says, the seed of woman. And so from there on out, we're off to the races, and we are looking for a solution from sin. And as we go through the Old Testament, it gets a little bit more and more clear about what this is going to look like. Until by the time we get to Jesus, a lot of the Jews were like, yep, that's him. Well, why? Because such a clear picture had been painted through the Old Testament. So Genesis 3:6, Genesis 3:15, let's keep marching down. Genesis chapter 12. All right, Genesis 12 is one of those chapters. If you don't know it, it's going to be hard to understand the rest of the Old Testament. Because in Genesis 12, God makes 3 promises to Abraham. Does anybody just know off the top of their head what those are? All right, I'm going to give you a great nation, which is important because he was past childbearing years, and he's got nothing as far as heritage is concerned. So I'm going to give you a great nation. What else?
The land of Canaan.
All right, we're going to give you a land. If you got a lot of family, you got to have a place to put them. You ever have people coming over, and you're like, that's more people coming than we got beds. All right, so God says, I'm going to give you a land for you to live in. And then the third one, the most important one, is what? All right, who's going to come through his family seed? Jesus. Okay, now if we're just looking at Genesis 12:3, I think we can still figure it out because it says, all nations of the earth will be blessed through your seed, just like Genesis 3:15. Now it's the seed of woman, the seed of Abraham. How could this be anything other than Jesus? You know, if I were to cure cancer today, which won't happen, but it would bless everyone living and everyone who will live. But what would it do for everyone who has already died? Nothing. Jesus is the only thing that would bless everyone living, everyone to live, but even more powerfully, everyone even that already had lived. But in Galatians chapter 3, it actually gives inspired commentary on Genesis 12:3, and it says, the gospel was preached to Abraham. The gospel, now I thought that was a New Testament concept. No, not just a New Testament concept. It's been working all the way through the Old Testament. And so Genesis 3:15 is that first gospel sermon. Genesis 12:3 is another gospel sermon. Okay, so now we have a people. And we're going to follow this people group all the way to Jesus. And they go from Abraham and his wife. They go to 75. They go into the land of Egypt and grow to be 2 to 3 million. And God takes them out of slavery and marches them towards the promised land. And he parks them at Mount Sinai for 1 year. And in your Bibles, you've got a thick section of Scripture from Exodus all the way to Numbers 10, I believe it is. And that's all about that 1 year at Mount Sinai. And God's getting them ready. Here's the priest, here's the laws, here's the tabernacle, here's the sacrificial system. You guys should take this knowledge and march right into the promised land that he mentioned. But do they do that? They do not, because they don't believe God. And so that generation, though it should have been the one to go into the promised land, was not. And I often think the Old Testament could be much thinner if the people had listened to God. But they don't. And so we have all these choose your own adventure, well, I guess we'll go this way for a few books kind of things. So now you've got this huge nation, and generation 1 doesn't make it. But Joshua leads generation 2 into the promised land, and they get it. And things go well, and they conquer, and they're listening to God. Well, until they're not. And then they start doing, the Bible says, whatever everybody wanted to do, whatever was right in their own heart. Well, you know how God feels about that. So this period of the judges appears, and people are doing great. They're following God, and they're thriving, and they're healthy, and no one is abusing them or threatening them. And then they get so comfortable, they get that affluenza. I think it was John McEnroe talked about. They're so affluent it becomes a sickness, and they get lazy, and they don't listen to God, and they don't help the weaker people, and God removes his protection. And then things get terrible. They get oppressed, and they cry out, God, please save us, please deliver us. And he sends this judge who sets them right spiritually and fights their battles for them, and then they get back to this position. So the judges is just a cycle of the same thing over and over. Maybe we do the same thing over and over. Eventually, the people say, we would like a king. And God says, you do not want a king. It will not end well. And they say, yeah, we don't care. We want one anyway. So God lets them do what they want to do. And who were the first three kings that they had? Y'all have to be loud. We're all friends here. It's okay. Saul, David, Solomon. Yes, y'all would be very good at Bible Bowl. Saul, David, and Solomon. That's right. And each of these kings reigned for 40 years. 40, 40, 40. Okay? And they were a united kingdom. That is almost like the United States of America. What makes us united? Though Mississippi and California may not hang out much, well, we're unified under the same government, under some of the same ideals, and you can easily travel back and forth between them. You have a unified leader, all right? Well, same thing was true of God's people, and you have the United Kingdom. But then, when Solomon dies, the kingdom divides. One of his sons goes to be king in the north, and one goes to be a king in the south. And out of those two, the north and the south, do you know which one never had a good king? All right, the northern kingdom. So now we've gone from a united kingdom to a divided kingdom. The north never has a good king. If you some of the time you get a children's Bible outline, and it has the kings on it, and it has a sad face for all of the northern kings, and that's how you know that there were no good ones there. All right, this kingdom is eventually taken away into captivity by Assyria. Now, Babylon is going to take the southern kingdom away eventually, and I've always gotten those two confused. Now, which one was it that took the north and which one took the south? And I figured out a way to remember it. A for the top, Assyria, and B for the bottom, so just AB. I figured that out about 6 months ago, and I thought, boy, I'm sharp. I'm 40. I'm really getting it together. Can't wait to see what happens soon. All right, so Assyria is going to take these people away because God said, look, you're going to go into houses you did not build. And you're going to eat from vineyards you did not plant. And if you obey me and you help people and you're who you need to be, then you'll stay there. But if you don't, you won't. And so they don't listen to God and they're taken off into captivity. All right, some of the people that are left in the land start intermarrying with all of the different heathen nations around them. And you have a new people that's formed. You have who is it? Who is it? You have the Samaritans, okay? So the Samaritans now kind of become enemies to the Jews. First of all, they're half-breeds. And we don't say that. They said that back then. We're trying to follow this family line to Jesus, and you guys have interspliced it with all the different heathen nations. You guys are worse than they are because you're half of what you should be and half of what you shouldn't be. And that's how they treated them. And that's why in the time of Jesus, they would walk around Samaria instead of going through it. We're too good to even walk through your land. Of course, Jesus comes in and blows that up. But this is the Samaritans. Now, in the southern kingdom, they eventually stop listening to God, and they're carried away into Babylonian captivity. All right, that catches us up to the time of Nehemiah. Nehemiah is going to be one of the guys who takes a group back. They had 3 waves that were taken out into Babylonian captivity, and they're going to have 3 waves that come back in. So you had Zerubbabel, he rebuilds the temple. You had Ezra, who restores the law. And you've got this guy, Nehemiah, who's going to come into the city and rebuild the wall around it. Now, why do you need a wall in these times? I didn't see a wall coming into Jackson when I got here. Why did they have a wall? All right, safety. Anybody lock their front door when they go to bed at night? All right, same thing for the city. We have locked the doors. So a city without a wall might as well put out a welcome mat for all the people that want to come in and take stuff or do them harm or whatever the case may be. So that's the time of Nehemiah. All right, so start with me in Nehemiah chapter 1. The walls have been down for about 100 years when we come to this time. So Nehemiah chapter 1, let's look at verses 1 through 3. Now it happened in the month of Chislev in the 20th year, as I was in Susa the citadel, that Hananiah, one of my brothers, came with certain men from Judah. And I asked them concerning the Jews who escaped, who had survived the exile, and concerning Jerusalem. And they said to me, the remnant there in the province who had survived the exile is in great trouble and shame. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates are destroyed by fire. So Nehemiah is just a cupbearer to the king, a glorified taste tester, we might say, although he may do some other things. And he is there, and a delegation comes back from the rebuild, and he says, how is it going? And remember, he's a Jew. I mean, this is their promised land. I mean, he's got this lineage of, man, look who I'm related to. I'm all the way to Adam, to Noah, to Abraham, and he marches on through time. And he hears the promised land is in ruins, and it's a shame, and it's the laughing stock of the people. Everything about who I am is based in my identity as a Jew, as the seed of Abraham, and my claim to this promised land. Everything looks back to it, and we work towards getting it. And it's in shambles, and it's in shame. Now, the book is named after him, so I would imagine he ends up being a pretty good character in this story, and that he's a leader. How would we expect him to react? How would most of the men in our culture react if a problem is brought to them? What's the first immediate thing that we do? Wives, you can speak up. What happens when you tell your husband a problem? What's he start doing? What do the wheels start turning to do? Fix it, all right? Spoiler alert, that's not the best idea. Hey, I read a blog like 5 years ago, and it changed my life, because here's what it said to do. In their family, they did this. Ask when someone starts to tell you something, do you want me to listen to help or just to listen? Because that's two different things. And we do that in my family now, and that is a game changer. Plus, like 99% of the time, it's listen just to listen anyway, so that should have been my default, I guess. All right, but you're right, I think. Most of our great leaders, what they start to do is formulate a plan, which is a good idea, but not a great place to start. So let's see what Nehemiah does. Look at the next section. And what he's going to do here is going to be the solution for all of our problems as well. Look at verses 4 and 5. As soon as I heard these words, I sat down and wept and mourned for days, and I continued fasting and praying before the God of heaven. So the first thing I want you to see that was the solution for Nehemiah's problems, and it's really the solution for our problems too, is that Nehemiah was broken over them. Like, they mattered to him. They broke his heart. I mean, his immediate reaction was not to come up with a plan. He is insufficient for the task in front of him. He's not a wall builder. My wife and I flip houses. I would not hire Nehemiah as my contractor. He has no experience in this field. And so he doesn't start to formulate a plan, but he realizes he's not a solution for the plan, and he's broken about the situation. And so what I want to suggest to you today is that that's a good place for us to start as well, is to be broken over our problems. In Psalm chapter 51, in verse 17, it says, "The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and a contrite heart, O God, you will not despise." David, don't bring me your sheep. Don't pour out your oil. Don't light incense. You better break your heart and humble yourself first. In the context of this psalm, Psalm 51, is David admitting his sin with Bathsheba. David, you want to fix this problem? You can bring me 1,000,000 sheep. It won't matter. You can make everyone give you all the oil in the land and pour that out, and you can burn every stick of incense in the world, and that doesn't matter unless you break your heart and get humble first. So I think the solution is the same for us. We have to start with humility. Pride that was mentioned earlier that won't allow us to address these topics, we have to kill the pride that's in us. You know, what is Nehemiah's job? Do you remember? Cupbearer. All right, so he's going to build a wall, and his previous job experience is cupbearer. You know, if we got his resume, we would throw it in the trash because he's not qualified for this job. There's no reason to believe that he can even be successful in this thing. He has no experience. But it doesn't matter, because here's where he started. He was simply broken over the problem. And maybe that's where true leadership is going to start for us, not with a sense of personal accomplishment. And I know you've worked hard, and I know you've put a lot of hours in study, and I know you've done a lot of good things, and you ask people what to do. But true leadership isn't going to start with anything that is about us, but with a sense of understanding that I can't do this outside of God. And any problem I'm going to tackle better start with, I need God for this solution. Not a sense of personal strength, but with a sense of limitations and a belief that we really need God. And I know we say we need God, but sometimes we maybe act like we're enough to get the job done. And that's not the case. Confidence can be a great thing, whether it's in business or with the ladies or whatever you want to say. Confidence can be a really good thing, but what are some problems that could come from confidence, or maybe too much confidence? What are problems with someone being too confident?
It's not reality sometimes.
All right, sometimes you have a little kid. He's got a sword. He's going to beat up this big guy. Well, that's not reality. The guy's just going to smack you and the kid's done with, you know? So sometimes we think more of ourselves than is realistic. Okay, what else? Yeah, all right, that's right. If you're supposed to go this way, but you know you're supposed to go this way, well, you're going to end up in the wrong place. So, man, I was confident, but I was wrong and ignorant, and it has led me down a bad road. All right, what else? Okay. We all would say, like, if we said, raise your hand if you know everything, no one would raise their hand. Maybe one smart aleck person would. And sometimes I'm that person, so I get it. But then if we said, let's look at your life and see if you act like you know everything, boy, sometimes that's different, right? And so a big problem from being too confident is we don't listen to other people, all right? Now, you do have to consider the source. You know, sometimes there are people that you want to listen to, and sometimes you're like, okay, I probably shouldn't listen to that advice. I have a nephew who tries to give me financial advice all the time, and he's broke. So, okay. All right, thanks, man. Good point. I didn't think of that. All right, but overconfidence can mean we don't listen. All right, anything else you can think of? What are some problems that come from overconfidence? Say that again? Arrogance. Okay. Man, have you ever been around someone who acts like they know everything? What a joy. You just want to invite them to all the parties, and we're having a fellowship meal. I hope you'll sit by me. No, of course not. Nobody likes to be around someone like that. And if that's us, people don't like to be around us, all right? So confidence can be good, but overconfidence can cause problems. You know, sometimes you'll see a minister burn out. Well, why? Well, he was so confident in his ability, he did everything and got burned out, or he started using coping mechanisms and then didn't let anybody know about it and ended up embroiled in some kind of controversy and setting a bad example. Well, why? He was overconfident. So confidence can be good, but overconfidence can be detrimental. And so Nehemiah started where we should all start when we tackle a problem. Man, I want Sawwell Road to grow. I want Jackson to improve as a city. I want my family to be happier. I want my marriage to be better. I want to reach my coworker. I want to reach my family. The place that starts is with just being broken and knowing that we are not enough in and of ourselves, but it's going to be God working through us and our limitations. And that's where Nehemiah started. So he was broken. The problem? 100 years of despair and failure building a wall. Nehemiah's solution? I have no idea, but I need God. And that's going to be the solution for each of us as well. All right, number 2, Nehemiah turned to God. Look at verse 5. And as we're going through this, I want you to remember this is what we worked through in our men's group for 3.5 years. It didn't take us as long to get through these verses 3.5 years, but this is the slow progression that we were making. And you're seeing men that are being taught, okay, I'm starting at the wrong place. All right, so then this next thing helps us to see where to go. Verse 5, and I said, O Lord God of heaven, the great and awesome God, who keeps covenant and steadfast love with those who love him and keep his commandments. Now, this is true, but this is also a mouthful for a guy who's living in exile and knows about his hometown being broken down and this problem of 100 years that people have not been able to overcome. So is God a promise keeper? Well, yeah, of course. That's a lot easier to say when you're inside the city walls and things are flourishing. He is well outside the city walls that are smoldering and in ruins. And he still says, God, I know you're a promise keeper. I don't know how you're going to keep this promise, but the fact that you are who you are and you've made it, you're going to keep it. And so he says a mouthful. So what we might do is we might start coming up with a plan, but Nehemiah does not do that. He goes to God first. In Jeremiah chapter 10 and verse 23 is a verse we go to a lot, but it says, I know, O Lord, that the way of man is not in himself, that it's not in man who walks to direct his steps. All right, there's a psalm that sounds similar to that we don't use as much, and I want to read that. Psalm 37:23 says almost the same thing. It says, the steps of a man are established by the Lord. Now, do you know who wrote Psalm 37? David did. Now, the steps of a man are established by the Lord, he said. David would know. What happened when David established his own steps? People died. Relationships died. This is not written by someone on a pedestal who, I've never been with the commoners. I don't know what sin feels like or temptation. This is written by a guy that ruined his life. And he says, it's not in man to direct his own steps, but it's in God to direct those steps. All right, so the next thing Nehemiah did is going to be important too, is he took personal responsibility and he confessed sin. We're just marching through his story. Here's bad news that you have no business taking care of. Well, he's broken, he goes to God, and then this third thing, he takes personal responsibility and confesses sin. Look at verse 6. Let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer of your servant, that I now pray before you day and night for the people of Israel, your servants, confessing the sins of the people of Israel, which we have sinned against you. Even I and my father's house have sinned, he says in verse 6. We've acted very corruptly against you and have not kept the commandments, the statutes, the rules that you commanded your servant Moses. So we have to understand that Our biggest problem is not geographical. It's not structural. Why did the walls fall? Because they were bad walls? Because the army didn't do a good job and made a tactical mistake? No. The walls fell because God let them fall. Why? Because of the people's sin. There was no army on earth. You can line up every army through eternity and put them against this wall, and the wall wouldn't have fallen, not if they were following God. So Nehemiah realizes this is not a problem for a general contractor or a carpenter. This is a problem for spiritual people. We're in this condition because of spiritual problems, and that's the only way that we'll get out of it. You know, I think about this, how this applies to us. If you're an impatient person, if you have a temper, if you look at pornography, if you're not tender to your spouse, if you don't get to work as a member of the church, we limit what God can do with us. You know, I wonder sometimes we think, why can't I get over the hump, or why am I not more successful, or why can't I be used in a bigger way at church? Sometimes we limit what God can do with us. God is not going to do certain things with people if they have sin in their life, and so the first thing we need to do if we want to be used is we need to take some personal responsibility. You know what confession is? It's a very beautiful word picture. It's pulling alongside the truth. So it's like we talked about earlier. It's silly to say, I don't need help, when I do. That's actually much weaker. It's very immature. But the truth is constant. And it's the truth no matter what anybody thinks about it. So like when the confession was made, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God, did that do anything to the truth? No. That didn't make it more strong. I mean, everybody could have denied it and it still would have been true. But confession is, what he did is he pulled up alongside it. Okay? So when you and I make a great confession, I believe Jesus is the Son of God before we become a Christian. And then we confess that each day. All we're doing is saying, I want to pull up alongside the truth. I want to see reality for what it is. I don't want to be the emperor's new clothing. I want to see things for what they are. So confession is this word picture. So here Nehemiah confesses to God, but all he's done is acknowledge the truth that God knew was there anyway. There's a couple interesting places when you think about confession in the Bible. Typically, when you think of confession, who do you think about confessing to? Usually. All right, most of us think of God. I sometimes, because of TV, think of confessing to like a priest in some kind of little building inside the church building or something. But scripturally speaking, I think of confessing to God. But God is not the only one that we're to confess to. In Romans chapter 10, it tells us with the mouth confession is made. So think about the implications of that. Does God need me to say anything out loud to know it? Now, like I could pause and say a prayer, and God would know it. You wouldn't know what I said, but God would. But confession is made with the mouth. That implies I'm saying it to someone else so that they can hear it. And James 5 adds some light on that. Verse 16 says, confess your faults to each other. Well, hold on a minute. We're not talking about God here. We're talking about some kind of a confession with each other. So that is, I see my life for what it is, and I'm pulling up alongside it, and I'm including other people in that in an audible, out loud, very tangible kind of way. And that's what Nehemiah is going to do in this next section. Now, I want you to brainstorm with me for just a minute. Just brainstorm with me. If you've never thought about that, that's okay. Let's think about it for a second. What are some things that saying our sins out loud could do for us? Man, sometimes it just feels good to get it off your chest. Do you ever do that? You say something, and then you may even apologize to the person. I'm sorry, I just unloaded on you. That was a lot. Well, why? Well, because you're carrying this burden around, and it just feels good to tell somebody who cares sometimes. What else? Okay. Yeah, sometimes it's like if we don't say it, it's not real. You know, it's like, I know I have this huge health problem, but I don't want to go to the doctor because he'll confirm it. And so it's like we're hiding from it. But if you say it out loud, it makes it real. Now it's something that needs to be addressed. All right, very good. What else? So when you hear the truth coming out of your mouth, that's big. You know, when we do Bible studies, we usually try to have the other person read the verse. Why? Because I want them to hear the words from God from their own mouth. I didn't say that. God said it, and then you said it. You know? Very good. All right. What else? Anything else you can think of? Okay, it can be a way to ask for help. Very good. Very good. Yeah, absolutely. We're to bear each other's burdens. How can we do that if we don't know what they are? This is just an impossible command. Can't be kept unless we say some things out loud. What else? I think that's huge too, accountability. That's not something that a lot of us do a lot of, is accountability. You know, when Cain killed Abel and said, am I my brother's keeper? The answer to that is yes, you are your brother's keeper. This is not an individual sport. It's a team sport. Christianity is. And so accountability is a huge part of that. All right, very good. Anything else that you can think of? Okay. Yeah, that's good. In our men's group, we had a guy from Malaysia who is a Christian, first-generation Christian, and a medical doctor. And we had a guy in our group who is from Michigan, very northern kind of lifestyle and even accent and stuff like that, but a good old country boy, a blue-collar worker. And as we started talking through some of these things, I remember week 6 is the week. I have Breakthrough Week written in my journal about it, our notes or whatever we compiled. And the doctor said something. And the blue-collar worker said, yeah, that's exactly how I feel. Now, what in the world? These guys couldn't be much different. But here they are feeling the exact same way, and a connection is made. Why? Well, because they were willing to talk about it. All right, so we have this, setting up this idea for that. Now look at verse 8. The next thing that Nehemiah does is that he repents. And he says in verse 8, if we return, you will forgive us. Now, if we return, what does that sound like? Repentance. You know, repentance, the word picture for that is you're going one way, you realize, oh, I shouldn't be going that way, and you do a U-turn, and you go the other way. And there are several times in our life that we repent of things as we discover them. And so that's what Nehemiah says. Not only am I saying that there's sin, I'm acknowledging, you hold me accountable, God, if we return. And I'm going to try to lead this return, he says. So not only does Nehemiah want to get well, and this is important, not only does he want to get well, he admits he's part of the problem, and he admits that he's willing to do whatever it takes to get better. Had they tried to rebuild the wall before? Do you know? Does anybody know if they've tried to rebuild this wall before? They have. Did it work? It didn't work, or they wouldn't be still trying to build it. Did it work? It did not. Now, why? Because they only tried to rebuild the wall. They didn't try to rebuild themselves. And so that's what Nehemiah is doing different. Forget the wall for now. Let's work on the reason the wall fell. And so Nehemiah repents of the sins that they had. All right, and then I want to spend the last few minutes that we have on what I think is the most important part as far as what we're discussing today about this idea of being connected to each other. Nehemiah asks for help. What do we say typically when someone says, how are you? Good. Okay, that's pretty good. That's a little more honest than most people get. Okay. I usually hear good, or I usually hear good and fine. And that's usually what I say. Those are typically the only two options. I will allow okay as well. That's pretty solid. So good, fine, okay. Now, are you sometimes good and fine? Are you sometimes good and fine? Yeah, sure. Probably all of us are sometimes good. Are you always good and fine? All right. So the question for us becomes, when you're not, who do you actually answer that question to? All right, now look at Nehemiah, look at chapter 2 and verse 1. So skip over to chapter 2, verse 1. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was before him, I took up the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had not been sad in his presence. All right, so it says, even after praying to God and taking personal responsibility, Nehemiah was sad. Now, that's interesting to me. Sometimes prayer alone isn't enough. Now that sounds kind of almost like when you first say it, but think about the reality of that. But think about what Nehemiah is doing. He prays, but he's still not complete. He's still not whole. There's still a problem in front of him. And each of us have seen that. Oh, prayer is important. It does things we'll never completely understand, I think. But prayer alone is not enough. And so Nehemiah recognizes that. But then it says that he's sad in the presence of the king, and this is the first time. Why wouldn't you want to be sad in the presence of a king? Anybody know? Why wouldn't you want to be sad in the presence of a king? Esther is very similar. She's afraid to go in front of the king. What would happen if you were sad in front of the king? You could get killed. And on the surface, that sounds terrible. And honestly, it is. But think about it, the implications of it. The king is dealing with the entire country. I don't need you to be moping around because your dog's sick or because your wife was mean to you today. I got big country type stuff to deal with. If you're sad in the presence of the king, that's inappropriate. I can't carry this weight and your weight, so just don't do it. But Nehemiah is sad in front of the king because of how important this is. Now look at verse 2, Nehemiah 2:2. And the king said to me, why is your face sad, seeing you're not sick? This is nothing but sadness of the heart. Then I was very much afraid. So the king asked Nehemiah, how are you? What's wrong? And remember what we say when someone asks that. Well, if we had been Nehemiah, we would have responded with this, I'm good. But that's not what Nehemiah says. So the question for us is, do we have anyone in our life that we can actually answer that question for? How are you? Well, fine and good. Or how are you? Well, actually, I don't know. I kind of need to talk about some things. Do we have anybody in our life that we can actually answer that question to? And look, I'm not suggesting you answer that question to everybody. Not everybody actually wants to know. So tomorrow, when you come in and 50 people say, hey, how's it going? I'm not saying none of them do. I'm sure several of them would actually want to know. But maybe not everybody. So maybe we don't unload on everybody. Maybe it wouldn't be appropriate as some of us middle-aged men to tell an 80 or 90-year-old sister about some of the things, or maybe a 5-year-old. Well, but I mean, can a 5-year-old tell a 5-year-old? Can an older woman tell an older woman? Can we answer that question to anybody? So what I want to encourage you is to try to cultivate some relationships where you can actually answer that question. Not to everyone. Don't just go around spraying all your tough emotions and battles on everybody, but to find some people that you can do what Nehemiah did and actually answer this question to. All right, so the next thing, Nehemiah's response is different than ours. Look at verse 3, because he's actually honest about his feelings and needs. Look at verse 3. I said to the king, let the king live forever. Why should not my face be sad when the city, the place of my father's graves, lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire? What do we normally do with our feelings? Most people, maybe not you, but what do you see most people normally do with their feelings? Bottle them up. Now, what happens when you bottle up pressure? It explodes. Now, our emotions are the same way. You can decide when and how they come out, or you just keep bottling them up, and then they'll come out whenever and however they want to. And so sometimes we're shocked by someone we would see who maybe cheated on a spouse, or cheated on their taxes, or cheated here, or did any of these sinful things, and then we realize, oh, they didn't have a release valve for that. They didn't have someone to talk to. They just bottled all of that up, and then they weren't necessarily in control of how it came out. It came out in all these places and broke their life. So when we bottle up pressure, it explodes, and when we bottle up our emotion, it does the same thing. Now, if we don't have anybody we share our feelings with, what that does is that isolates us. It kind of puts us on an island where we don't talk about the things that we're dealing with, and it leaves us lonely and distant from other people. It leaves us without community. But if you're not ready to be a part of real community, you're not ready to be a part of real community unless you understand your feelings and how to share those. So it would be no wonder to us sometimes that we might have some people that come in and they're there every time and they sit by somebody in the pew every time, but then eventually they're not there anymore. And they weren't that plugged in when they were there, but they were there all the time. How is that possible? They kept themselves isolated and they didn't let themselves connect to anyone else. They weren't a part of community. Even though they were in the building, even though they were beside somebody, you're not a part of community unless you share, unless you open up. Now think about any kind of changes you might try to make in your life. Addiction, anxiety, anger, depression, loneliness. Those are tough places to be by yourself, to be fighting that battle on your own. And if you're doing that, then you're not using all the tools that God has given you. Now, I'm going a little longer on this one. I'll make it up to you by being shorter on the next couple, if that's all right. We got a deal? I mean, what are you going to say? You can say no. That'd be kind of rude. But, so I mentioned earlier my wife and I flip houses, and sometimes I'll get to a job. I'm not real handy, so I hire the work out, but I'll have to jump in and do some things sometimes. And sometimes I'll get to a job thinking it's done, and then there's one little screw sticking up on the porch or one little nail, and I'll have to try to take care of that. And I was coming from somewhere else. I don't have my tools with me. You ever tried to do a job with the wrong tool? Has anybody ever tried to nail in a nail with a screwdriver? Raise your hand if you've done that. All right, somebody tell me what happens when you do that. You got hurt? Oh, no. That's the worst case scenario. What usually happens to the screwdriver? Break. Did you get hurt because part of the screwdriver head broke off and flew at you? Yeah, okay. That's what happens. Now, I would like to say I learned that lesson after one screwdriver, but honestly, it took me two. But now I've got it. Don't try to do it. It's never going to work, okay? But I have to think some of the problems that you and I deal with, God would look down to us and just say, look, the reason you're struggling with this is you're not using the right tool. You're going through addiction or depression or anxiety or a certain temptation you keep falling to, and I think God would say, okay, what are you doing? Well, I'm praying to you and asking for help. Great. There's no substitute for that. What else? Well, I read Scripture. I'm anxious, so I read Philippians chapter 4. God will say, hey, great, Scripture's good. That works, that helps. What else? Well, I'm taking personal responsibility. I'm trying really hard, and I'm working. Oh, good, yeah, no substitute for that. What else? And we would look at God almost like, what do you mean, what else? What else can I do? What are the other tools? God might almost say, like, you're just not using all the tools that I've given you, because one of the tools God has given us is each other. And part of the reason that we have each other is to overcome some of these things that we struggle with in our life. And so if you're trying to overcome a sin, a temptation, even a problem in your life on your own, and it's not going well, it could be because you're not using the right tool for the job. Now, I went through and spent a lot of time researching this in the Bible, so if you want to pull out a phone and take a picture of this so you have a record, I found a list of everyone in the Bible who did it on their own. No one. Nobody ever did it. But our thought is, well, I'll be the first. No, you won't. Now, we're tempted to quickly say, well, Jesus did it on his own. But think about ways in which that's not true. Before that great period of temptation in the wilderness, Jesus is baptized by John the Baptist and receives the Holy Spirit. Then right on the other side of it, as soon as the temptation is over, he's ministered to by angels and he selects his 12 apostles. Well, why is that? Well, Jesus bookends this great period of temptation with support from other people. It's as if Jesus is divinely telling us, you need other people to get through these things that are in your life. So the king asks Nehemiah this question, how are you? And what does Nehemiah do? He actually answers the question. And what's interesting that as you keep reading, and you can read this later on your own, is that Nehemiah is given everything he asked for and more. I mean, he doesn't even know what he's asking for, and the king gives him what he actually needs. So let's close with just a couple practical things, some things to think on so that you can actually start to maybe put this in practice. What are some obstacles for us talking about our feelings and needs, and obstacles to us connecting with each other in that way? All right, don't want to be judged. Look, if I tell you who I really am or some of the thoughts I really have, you'll look down on me because you're perfect and I'm not, and I'll be judged by that. All right, what else? Okay, yeah, our society has kind of said do things on your own, and we've all been burdened by people who just won't do anything on their own. Here's all my dead weight, carry it. And so we don't want to do that. And so we don't want to feel like a burden to someone. What else? Yeah, look, some people are going to say things you don't want them to say. Have you ever told somebody something, and then later you hear it come out of somebody's mouth over here? And you're like, well, wait a minute, I didn't tell them. How did it get from here to there? Okay, so confidentiality. And so that's part of that wisdom in not just telling everybody everything all the time, but find people that can be trusted. All right, what else? What are some more obstacles to talking about the needs that we have and the feelings that we have? Yeah, some of these things will be embarrassing. I mean, some of them aren't. I have anger issues. Well, that's been kind of normalized, so that's not too embarrassing. Some of these other things are embarrassing. All right, anything else? What do you mean by that? Man, I have a guy I used to go out to eat with some, and he would spend a lot of time on his phone, like just doing little. I'm like, I don't want to really hang out. What in the world? You can do that some other time, you know? All right, so we don't sometimes have people's full attention. And I think that's true as we learn to do these things. Not everybody is going to be a good candidate to actually answer, how are you? A couple others I thought of is that you've never done it, and you've never seen it done. Imagine some of us in here could probably, if the water fountain broke, fix it. Could anybody do that? You think? Who would we ask? Everybody look at the guy we would point to if the water fountain was broken. Where is he? All right, good. All right, good. What's wrong with the rest of you? Are you not smart? No, it's just a different skill. What's the difference between him, although I'm sure he's super sharp, and you? Well, he's done it. He's seen it done. He's done it a million times. Okay, with me, he probably is a lot smarter than me. But at the same time, could I figure it out? Well, yeah, I just need to practice and see it done, okay? So some of these things, it's like our family's never talked about it. Our church has never talked about it. We've literally never seen somebody walk up to a Christian friend and say, hey, can I share something with you in confidence? Or can I get some help? Or would you hold me accountable? Like I feel like, man, I'm just not studying the Bible with anybody. And nobody's going to call me out on that, but I want you to call me out on that. And so we've never seen it done. And so it's almost like fixing the water fountain. Well, I wouldn't even know where to start. But we have to learn to maybe normalize some of these things. I want us to look at one more verse, and then we'll take a break. Look over to 2 Samuel chapter 13. And I just want to show you what happens to someone when they go through a tough time. A tougher time. Tough time is putting this lightly. 2 Samuel 13. But I want to show you what happens to an individual when they go through a tough time and they don't talk to anybody about it. And I know this is a dramatic example, and I want to try to be discreet because of the material that is here. But I think it does have a principle for us. So 2 Samuel 13, look at verse 20. So in the verses before this, before verse 20, Tamar is assaulted by her half-brother Amnon. And you know what I mean by that type of assault. Now, when her other brother, Absalom, hears about it, here's the advice that he gives his sister. You've just been assaulted by her half-brother. Here's the advice that he gives his sister. Verse 20. And her brother Absalom said to her, Has Amnon your brother been with you? Now hold your peace, my sister. He's your brother. Do not take this to heart. Can you imagine the trauma she has just been through? And her brother says to her, don't tell anybody about it. Come on, this is your brother. You don't want to hurt the family. You don't want this getting out. You don't want to have to deal with all the ramifications from this. Just keep your peace. And she did, and here's the price she paid. Look at the next part. So Tamar lived a desolate woman in her brother Absalom's house. So I know this is dramatic, and it's not as dramatic maybe for us, but desolation is going to be the price that we pay. Emptiness is going to be the price that we pay for quietness, for solitude, for isolation. If we're trying to get through life and handle problems all on our own, we're not using all of the tools that God has given us. Now, as I mentioned, and we're not going to get into this, but the king responds favorably and helps. And I want us to do an exercise to drive this home, okay? Let's do an exercise. How many of you would mow grass for someone in here if they were going through a hard time and needed it? Raise your hand. All right, how many of you would loan some money to somebody? Maybe they're on vacation and their card gets frozen for some reason, or something happens to their account for a few days. How many of you would loan some money to somebody for a few days? All right, hey, Derek, make a list of these people for me. Okay? All right, now, here's another question. How many of you have ever called somebody and said, hey, look, I'm going to be honest with you, it's just been a tough week. My wife's just had surgery, I've just had surgery, the kids have been sick, my grass is up to my shin, and I'm looking at my calendar and it's going to be up to my knees before I can get to it. Could you mow my grass? I'm just curious how many people have done something like that. Okay, very few of us. Do you see the imbalance in that? We have a room full of people willing to help. Would jump over the other guy in this room to be the one to get to do it. And we have a room full of people not willing to ask for that help when they need it. And so what we create when it's that way is a culture of, I'd be glad to help, and a lot of people who want to help but aren't able to because people don't let them into their lives to help. And look, I'm not saying be somebody who asks for help all of the time and becomes a burden. But we have to get to the point where we're willing to and we're able to ask for help so that people can help us. So read the rest on your own and see how the king responds. And so this is kind of the summary for us today of what we worked through in our men's group and some things that I think you can help yourself in if you want to connect to the people in this room in a better way. Be broken about the problems that are here. And then before you even start to formulate a plan, go to God about them. Man, this is a great church in a great area in a great community with great facilities. I want us to grow. What's the solution? I want to be a better husband. I want to work on my marriage. We didn't do family Bible time growing up, and I don't know what that looks like, but I want my kids to see it. Where do I start? We'll be broken over that and then go to God for his help. But then be willing to take personal responsibility, confess the sin that you've got, repent of it, be honest about the things that you need, and be willing to ask for help. And if you want to do some more study on these kinds of things on your own later, these are 3 books that I recommend. Philip Jenkins, youth minister at Mount Juliet, congregation of over 1,000, wrote this book called The Lunch Ladies, Cultivating an Atmosphere about Service that's really good. I sat down to read 1 page and read the whole book because it was just so good and I couldn't put it down in less than an hour, I think. Then this is the book we use with the study of Nehemiah to walk through our men's group, 7 Principles of Highly Accountable Men. Mark Lacer had ruined his ministry, ruined his life, cheated on his wife. They stuck it out, worked on it, and he has since counseled thousands of men and thousands of couples, and he wrote a book about how to get rid of sin in your life and be accountable to other people. Not a member of the church, but a lot of good stuff. And then Contagious Disciple Making is about using groups to grow in ways that just you in a Bible or just you in the corporate assembly can't always facilitate. So these are 3 good books. And then, like I said, I'll do this each time, leave my contact information up. I appreciate you guys, and we'll take a small break.